Hello and welcome to today's session. We're going to be talking about supply chain attacks. My name is Per Söderqvist.
And my name is Hägglund.
And this is a very hot topic at the moment. We have a lot of things to cover during this session. And one thing that we wanted to do is kind of go beyond the buzz of these types of attacks and really kind of dig a little bit deeper, understand on that there are a lot of these types of attacks ongoing. But before we begin, this was something that we also talked about during the last session and just kind of defining different types of cyber attacks. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend to go back and look at it. But we talked a little bit about the telemetry on targeted attacks. But today we're going to be focusing more on the supply chain scenarios, so the supply chain attacks. Do you have anything to add there, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, we like we talked about in previous session, we focused a lot on the APTs and the targeted attacks. This will be kind of a mix of that, and we'll try to circle back to some of the threat actors that we've seen leveraging these targeted attacks, but also to highlight the fact that these are often intertwined with the supply chain attacks that we see from the telemetry that we gather.
Yeah. And I would also kind of underline a little bit that supply chain attacks is something that, of course, this is something that a lot of people read about in the news. It's often extremely broad-scaled types of attacks. It creates a lot of damage. So that is also one of the reasons why it kind of generates as much media attention as it does. But one thing also to understand that there are, of course, all different types of supply chain attacks, kind of different subcategories. But the end game is for the attackers is most of the time the same. It's basically to infiltrate a trusted third-party supplier and abuse trusted access, to implement malware, steal intellectual property, or spy on internal communication.
Yeah, and when you have that trusted supplier access and you have that trust relationship with the customer, it gets really difficult to distinguish what is legitimate and what is illegitimate. So that's when you actually leverage that trust to be able to deploy that malware to that organization via the third-party supplier. So it could be, like Per mentioned, a number of different mechanisms. One of the most common one being the poisoned updater package, for example, that we will be covering in this session as well, which you then utilize in order to take over the third-party supplier and perform the actual attack against the organizations that are connected to that third-party supplier. So that is what a supply chain attack is. You're basically leveraging a trust relationship and taking over that third-party supplier, which is responsible for the organizations that they're currently managing. So that's one of the most typical kinds of supply chain attacks.
And to tie back a little bit to what Alex said, in an independent research that Vance and Bourne did, we saw that on average, the number of suppliers that a medium business has connected to them is 3 smaller businesses. And also another very interesting statistic was that 1 in 10 stated that they basically got their ransomware attack through a third-party supplier.
So we've seen a switch in how IT security is delivered to customers, being that the managed security service providers have been more commonly used in order to deliver this kind of services to the customers rather than having it in-house. That just highlights the importance of having a MDR solution, so a managed detection and response, which is basically taking care of and monitoring the security for your organization 24/7, making sure that you're not susceptible to these threats outside of office hours, for example, when you're sleeping or after hours. That's when we've seen the attackers being the most active. And we have a couple of examples of that. We will be talking about it later. But the trend now being that we're actually seeing a rise in outsourced IT security, and having that extra support in your back pocket instead of having everything in-house.
Yeah, and really to underline what you're saying as well, MSPs and MSSPs have started to be a particularly attractive target for these different groups as well, where they do see these as high value targets, and if they do manage to get in there, they know that they will have a much easier way to gain access to other organizations as well.
Yeah, so we talked a bit about the different kinds of supply chain attacks, and the one that we'll be covering right now is the compromised software update. So basically, when a attacker takes advantage of the updates sequence and the update routines for the third-party software vendor in this case. And we've seen a number of these instances in the past, SolarWinds being one of the most, notorious one, so to speak, but there has been a number of others during the years which hasn't been given as much spotlights, but it's been occurring a number of times, and then we've seen that with faulty update routines and bad quality assurance when it comes to implementing packages into your updates routines, it's been very easy to take advantage of that in order to infect organizations with third-party software that does not belong to the third-party vendor in this case. So there's a lot of planning going into this, of course. So if you look at a flow chart for the actual update sequence and the actual development of an update package, it's the same principle as when you actually develop the malware. So in the first stages, you need to plan, you need to design, and you need to develop, and you need to test it, of course, deploy it, and review it. So if we look at the SolarWinds attack, for example, imagine the sophistication that went into this entire cycle of processes in order to get that payload and that backdoor into the Orion software. We're actually going to show you a demonstration of this. So it's a very simple demonstration of how you can actually poison an update package in order to leverage that to install a backdoor on a client. We have a Windows 10 machine running here. It's a completely normal desktop. And I've chosen to use the TeamViewer application in order to demonstrate the poisoned package updater attack in this case. So we're going to go ahead and open up TeamViewer here on this client. Just a second here. There we go. So it's going to locate TeamViewer. So obviously, I've chosen to use a rather old version of TeamViewer, and the reason for that being that TeamViewer has, of course, improved, and they have added security checks and mechanisms in order to make sure that you're not downloading anything illicit from update servers or third-party sources, that is, or untrusted sources, basically. So in this case, I've actually used my own update server. So I've actually poisoned the DNS cache, and I've managed to steer the client to my update server instead. So I'm actually delivering a untrusted package to this client. So as you can see, the update was successful. However, there's no installation process, as you can see, for the new version of TeamViewer here. So looking closely at this in Process Explorer, you can see that the TeamViewer service has indeed started a update process, but instead of the normal TeamViewer updater, I've replaced this with my own payload. So you can see that there's a file called update.exe which is running. So it's actually been launched by the updater process by TeamViewer in this case. And if we look closely on that file, just to demonstrate the how easy it was back then in order to infiltrate a machine using a third-party updater. So you can see here we have the update file. It's actually something completely different. So I've actually also added a digital signature in order to circumvent some of the security features and allowing me to run it in the background. And if we go to the Kali machine, which is the attacker in this case, so this is the command and control server, which the updater is phoning back home to in this case. I'm going to start the Metasploit framework in order to interact with this backdoor using one of the built-in interpreters in Metasploit. So I'm using a multi-handler, and I'm also choosing the payload Windows shell reverse TCP because I'm just establishing a simple command line prompt in this case. I'm setting the local host, setting the port because I'm going to listen on that host and port for the exploit. And as you can see, given a shell straight off the bat using the updated or the updater Trojan. And this is the kicker here. The updater is actually launched as NT authority system, which means I don't have to escalate my privileges. I'm already root on this box. Basically, I'm as high as I can be when it comes to privileges, which means I can do anything right now. So that just goes to show that it's extremely dangerous if you manage to get your own poison package into the update process, which actually happened for reals with a lot of vendors, including SolarWinds in this case. So that was just a quick demonstration, but imagine how easy that was for me with the knowledge and the the historical knowledge of how an attack occurs, and then performing that in a matter of hours on this machine. And looking back at the SolarWinds attack, imagine the time and energy and effort and money that went into planning and performing that amount of sophistication into actually implementing that backdoor into the Orion software. So it's really interesting how big of an attack that was, basically. So yeah, again, the principle here being that it was, for me, it was pretty easy to perform this attack because I already know I knew which software to use, which tools to use in this case, and the techniques that went into actually performing the attack on this machine. And the SolarWinds attack was pretty similar because they also used a poisoned update package, which they infected into the Orion software for download on all the on-premise SolarWinds servers around the world. So basically, when they had established that kind of foothold, they were able to take control of every computer or every server running the Orion software using that built-in backdoor into the SolarWinds application. So that was, imagine that sophistication, being able to bypass the quality assurance, the testing, the development team, etc., and actually implementing that backdoor into the software. So that's just really amazing how much the amount of sophistication that went into that attack.
Yeah, and it's also, these are some of the highlights. These are some of the bigger attacks that we've seen over the last couple of years. And it's also, one thing that I find to be quite interesting is the timelines of these attacks, how much they've also started to use automation in order to ensure that the attack completes faster. And they also tend to use different days during the year when they know that people are off, that they actually execute these attacks on. So there is a lot of planning going into this, of course.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just look at the timeline here for the SolarWinds attack, for example. We can see that there's been, the threat actors actually accessed the SolarWinds, development team back in 2019, and then they were able to inject the test code and begin the trial runs at the end of 2019. So, I mean, it's just, if you imagine that the attack was actually deployed in February 2020, then you can see that there was a lot of time that they actually spent on making sure that this attack was actually successful. So circling back to, the compromised software update package and how easy that was, Imagine being able to bypass all of that, all of these security mechanisms and all of these testing mechanisms that they have in place for their software today. So it just goes to show that there's a lot of planning, time, resources, and development going into an attack like this. So it's just hats off, basically. All right. So again, the trend here being that there is a supplier delivering a trusted package, which is in fact a malware payload. And we have seen a number of these attacks in the past, just like we mentioned in the beginning. It's just not SolarWinds and Kaseya. There's been a number of other, maybe not as prominent as the SolarWinds attack or the Kaseya attack, but still they've managed to cause a lot of damage. So ConnectWise being one of them, a really popular RMM solution, CCleaner, for example, and BuildQuick, all of them being affected by the same kind of attack when it comes to the delivery of the actual malware payload to the customers. And that just goes to show that there's so important to have behavioral-based screening of applications that are trusted as well. So you don't have to, you can't trust anything on the computer. You need to have that vigilant eye looking at every application that is running on a computer to make sure that nothing illicit has happened. So going back to the previous session that we had, we talked a lot about living off the land binaries, for example. So actual binaries that are already in Windows that are used for attacks, very advanced attacks as well. So certificate utility, MSHTA, background intelligence transfer agent, etc. So the importance of looking at these applications closer and determining, is this actually a behavior that is supposed to occur during this process, right? So that just that asks us the question: should we actually automatically trust applications that we know? Yes or no? I think not, because we need to dig deeper into what is actually happening, and the SolarWinds attack being a really good example of that we need to actually have a way of looking at the behavior of that specific application, right, Per?
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And also, if we kind of understand or look a little bit deeper on what actually happened on the endpoint, if we take the REvo attack with Kaseya as an example, just kind of understanding this, again, coming back a little bit to the previous session that we had, kind of the TTPs, understanding how they operate, what actually occurs on the endpoint when you get infected. And one thing that we see in a lot of these attacks are, of course, in the first instance, that they use different commands to try to turn off any endpoint protections that you might have. In this particular instance, they used a PowerShell command that attempted to stop Windows Defender. But we also know that they use a lot of different scripts to turn off a bunch of different security vendors that are commonly being used amongst different customers.
Yeah, definitely. And as you can see, they actually used the living of the land binaries here as well. So they use the certificate utility to decode the actual payload from a encrypted file. And this, we were able to capture this as well using the telemetry that we gathered. The payload is then executed, which drops the hollowed process of Windows Defender into the Windows folder. So that is then used in order to execute and sideload the REvo DLL, which is then establishing that persistence and foothold on that machine in order to perform the actual attack. So and then we can see that they're using the net SH to discover other clients and nodes in the network. So they're performing recon in order to laterally move and encrypt other machines. So this is an important part of the attack in this case, because they want to have as big as a reach as possible in order to encrypt and encrypt all the files and extort them in order to take over the whole organization using the ransomware.
Yeah, and once all the files are encrypted, you'll see this note basically underlining that everything is encrypted. One thing that I do want to highlight that I often get questions about is more in terms of, well, if we do decide to pay, will we get our files back? And just like they're stating themselves, they are a business. they even provide you with a tool so that you can actually check that it works. So you can upload one file to ensure that you can actually decrypt the files that got encrypted during this attack. So of course, this is a very, very common payload that they still use, ransomware being a very popular.
It's just it's one of those ways to easily extort companies and being able to establish that foothold using a third-party supplier. So circling back to everything that we've been talking about, it's just it goes to show that you need to have a really good security solution and looking at not only the untrusted packages, but also the trusted applications and packages. So looking for behavior, looking for signs of malicious activity in everything that happens on the endpoint, basically. So this is an example of another very popular supply chain attack that we have seen performed by the AP1010 group. So they infiltrated the managed service providers, in this case, to deploy malware for remote access. So they used malwares from the PlugX and Redlease family in this case. And what was the goal really with this pair? What was the interest?
So this differs from the previous example where the goal was to plant ransomware, get their money that way, whereas in this case, they basically stole data from the organizations that they managed to compromise through an MSP. So it also shows a little bit that different groups have different objectives that they work against. One trend that is becoming a lot more frequent is a combination of the two, where they first of all steal the data, and then once they've managed to get a hold of that, they also plant the ransomware. It's kind of the last step.
But I also think it's very interesting that they just didn't go for any customer in this case. They really singled out the high value customers here from that managed service provider that they manage. So instead of just going spray and pray to install ransomware everywhere, they're actually singled out a couple of customers that were high value targets in order to extract and exfiltrate the data from these particular customers. So that must have been, really vital information for this group or the state that they were funded from or a part of, basically.
Yeah, and just to kind of summarize a little bit on this topic, so probably not a big surprise to many of you who are attending, but of course one key aspect is to shift from a reactive to a proactive approach when it comes to cybersecurity overall. And another thing that we often discuss is also just having tools so that you can monitor for early signs of compromise. This is something that we also talked extensively about during the last session, that you have the visibility, you gather the telemetry that's on everything that's happening within your organization and can quickly pick up on signs that something suspicious is going on.
Yeah, and don't automatically trust your supply chain. Take audit, look for what is actually happening and changes that occurs, monitoring behavior, etc. This is really important, but because judging from the knowledge that we have right now and what we've seen so far, we really need to start doing that with every vendor in our supply chain. So making sure that we have that vigilance when it comes to what is actually happening in an organization. You need to have that kind of audit. Yeah. Good. Anything you want to add there, Per?
No, I think that's really good. I hope that everyone found this information useful. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We're here to help out. Yeah. Anything else to add, Alex?
No. Interesting subject in my opinion. It's been all over the news lately. There's also on Swedish television and Swedish streaming services, we have something called Hackad. So I actually suggest that you watch that one. It's actually pretty interesting. Really cool series, and it really highlights a lot of what we've been talking about, but on a much more higher level. So really interesting. But again, just like Per said, if you have any questions, if you want to talk security, don't hesitate to reach out.
Great. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you very much. Take care.